Om Jnana-timirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guroho Shri Yutapada Kamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrinda Vineshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Tushe Namaha Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Okay, Hare Krishna, everyone. I will begin sharing my screen. Today, we may or may not have as many activities just because I want to get some forward momentum going. But let's see. It depends how quickly we get through this content. So I will put us just here. Yeah. Yes, I want to revise from here. Okay, so just to catch us up from last week, we went on from our discussion of Mayavad and impersonalism, and we went into our discussion of the texts. We were discussing a few focal and interesting ideas. So then we made a comparison to what the Vaishnava and correct understanding is of the levels of the absolute, who was what and what is who. Then, yeah, we broke it down into this. And of course, then we contrasted it against the Mayavadis. Just to point out, Brahman is Krishna, right? It's more so a question of the person appreciating the aspect, rather than an actual division within Krishna, right? Krishna is undividable in a sense, right? And so because of that, when we say the Brahman effulgence, it's more referring to people who are only appreciating the existence aspect of Krishna. But the Brahman is still Krishna. And our acharyas, that all the time, they'll translate Brahman and Paramatma as Bhagavan, right? They'll do this rather comfortably because of this, right? And that's something we're going to touch on, hopefully, as we get deeper into the second chapter. Sometimes we want to be very rigid with Sanskrit. We want it to always correlate to the same idea, which seems to make sense, right? We want it to be very firm and rigid, and this word always means this, but we don't allow that with any language. Why should we expect that of Sanskrit, right? It's sort of, it isn't how language works, right? Language is very flexible. So we had that, then we were talking about the Atman, right? The individual spirit soul. And so, of course, the Mayavadis, they say that Brahman is the highest aspect, right? And the other aspects are illusion, right? Whereas we would say Brahman is divine, but Bhagavan is much higher. So when we come then to the Atman, what do Mayavadis say about the Atman? Mayavadis say there's only one Atma, there's only one soul, and we are all that one soul, and that one soul is Brahman, that one soul is the supreme, the divine, right? And we are all that divine who's forgotten he's that divine, or she's that divine, or they are that divine, right? So this causes issue because the text of the Bhagavad-gītā clearly isn't saying that, right? As we've already discussed. So the Atman very clearly exists eternally. It has never changed, and therefore there is no issue. Then we discuss this, discussing the mindset, right? The mindset of those who are attached to the body and not to the soul, right? And so this text is trying to illustrate what is the mindset that is being condemned here, right? What is the mindset that is being condemned in terms of apparent compassion? Because it is always a selfish compassion. Yeah. And then we discussed those who are wise lament not for the living nor for the dead, right? So this is one way to break the text down. Of course, we also broke it down another way, but I feel like this way, following the primary logic, makes most sense. So that's what we got up to last week. If there's any questions regarding that, please ask now. Otherwise, then we'll continue going into the text. Okay, so we were talking about text 14 when we left off last week, if I remember correctly. And in text 14, matra sparshastu kamteya shitushna sukha dukkadaha agamapa yino nityaha tanstitikshasva bharata. Maybe Rani Mataji, would you like to read out the English?
Yeah, Hare Krishna Prabhuji. I'm really lost. Which text are we reading?
Text 214. So we're just continuing from last week. Just
Okay.
Because we ended the lesson plan halfway during the plan, so I'm just continuing ahead halfway.
That's okay. So yeah, I'll just read. Just begin with the page. Text 14.
Yes.
Okay. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharata, and one must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed.
Jai. So thank you very much, Mataji. So as we were discussing last week, this is continuing that trend of not continuing that trend, this is continuing the elaboration of not identifying with the body, right? Dehi nosmin yatha dehe. It was saying the material body is always changing, right? It's always changing, it's always modifying. So how can that be you? How can that be the true self, right? But then in 214, what is he saying? Matra sparshastu kanteya. Shitoshna sukha dukkha daha, right? Sukha dukkha, these mental transformations, happiness and sadness, these transformations of the mind, they're also changing as well, just as much as kaumaram, yovanam, jara, right? Just as much as we have the different ages, right? The different the different times of life in the material gross body, we also have sukha and dukkha, these transformations of the subtle body, right? And therefore, how can the subtle body be the eternal self, right? How can the subtle body be that thing which is always staying the same? So you are not your mind either, O Arjuna. Of course, there's a lot to take out of this. This was, I think, either this one or Janma Karma Chame Divyam was the first shloka I ever learned. That was, or Sarva Dharman Parityaja. Those three are like the three first that you learn, right? So this one, and there's a reason why, right? It's very applicable. So there's another point that's being made about the nature of happiness and sorrow as well, because these texts, not only are they making a philosophical point, but they also are there in order to give some consolation, right? So not only is Dehi nosmin yatha dehe saying, hey, you know, they're not their body, right? It's also saying that you see the body you see the soul go through all of these bodies anyways, why mourn? And in the same way, he's saying happiness and distress, right? They come naturally. They're a natural cycle. They are the nature of this material world. Irregardless, you are not going to escape from happiness or distress. And yeah, and that's why they are the materialist's favorite verse, right? Because there's something very relevant. You don't need to believe in anything actually to acknowledge this is true. This is the simple nature of the material world, right? So that nature is that you'll have a bit of happiness and have a little bit of distress. However, actually, what it's saying is there is only distress. Because what is that happiness? That happiness is there for contrast, right? That happiness is there so that we don't become adjusted to the distress, right? That happiness is there so that when the distress kicks in, it's always going to be impactful. Or rather, we can look at it the other way. No matter what distress we're in, we adjust to it. And then suddenly the lesser distress becomes a happiness, right? There is actually no meaningful happiness in the material world, right? Of course there is, in the sense that the spiritual world appears in the form of Krishna's holy name and devotees, right? In that sense, but that's the spiritual world appearing in our world. The material world in of itself has no happiness. And why is that? Again, everyone's happiness is just a lesser suffering than the regular suffering we're used to, right? That's all that it is. Everyone's adjusted, and so we're suffering less. And it's fair to call that happiness, right? We can think of negative numbers. -8 is more positive than -11, right? I hate to throw some math on you on your weekends. I hate to do that to you, but -8 is still higher than -11, but it's still a negative number, right? So, sukha dukkha daha, right? The sukha is just -8, right? And the dukkha is just -11, right? So it's always going to be there. You cannot have happiness without distress. It's like saying, I have a stick with one end. This material world is filled with dualities, and these dualities can only exist in definition against each other, right? A stick with one end, if you sit down and try and think of it, you can't think of it, right? There is no such thing as a stick that only has one end. It's the same with happiness and distress. Happiness is implicit and inherent in distress, and distress is inherent and implicit in happiness. So then what's the point? Why are you trying to run away from either, right? Krishna now, he's not just making a philosophical point, he's making a very practical point, right? He's making a very pragmatic point. Oh, Arjuna, either way you are going to experience sorrow, either way you're going to experience happiness. Don't identify with it, right? That is not who you are. Again, I made this point last week, I want to make this point again. We can see here, if we really read the text deeply, it's not saying, right, if you're sad, suppress your sadness, right? It's not saying suppress your emotions. I would argue it's saying much the opposite. Experience your emotions. Don't become a repressed, weirdo, right? What it's saying is don't identify with those emotions. When those overwhelming emotions are there, realize that they come and they go and they are not me. In the same way that we experience our bodies, right? Krishna does not say, Krishna does not say, completely shut up all of your senses and all. I mean, that's there, right? But as we read further in the Gita, we'll find that Krishna doesn't really recommend it, right? Instead, realize you're not your body by inhabiting your body, right? Inhabit your body, experience your body, but realize you're not that body as well. Do not identify with it. A little tricky, but once we get that nuance, right? Once we really understand that the Bhagavad-gītā comes off much less cold, and that's because it's not cold, right? But at times we can read this and we can think, oh wow, that's a bit intense, right? That's a bit harsh to implement. So that's that. Now, as we keep on going, we hear text 15. Text 15 really is just text 15 is just really a continuation of that theme of text 14, right? Maybe Vignaraj Prabhu, would you like to read out the English translation of text 15?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
All good.
So, O best among men, Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress is steady in both, is certainly eligible for liberation.
Yes. So we can find here, interestingly, here we find, to my knowledge, the first clear reference to liberation, right? So here we find it, right? Krishna is really building up to the important stuff, right? Now we're finding to discuss some sort of discussion about the goal of life. And what is the Sanskrit word for liberation? Who can tell me? What is the Sanskrit word that's used? You can look in the word for word.
Amritatvaya.
Yes. So Amritatvaya, right? So Amrit, what does Amrit mean? Who can tell me? Thank you for finding the word.
Nectar.
Nectar.
Nectar, right? That is ambrosia, is another way it's translated. That's and I really like that translation because etymologically they're similar, right? Because it is nectar, right? But why does it mean nectar, right? Because the nectar it's often referring to is a very special nectar, right? That gives immortality, right? We know mrityu, mrityo mrityum namamiham, right? We sing about Nrsingadev, right? The death of death, right? So mrit, mara, these things, they mean death in Sanskrit. But when you put an a in front of it, it's like saying non, right? So it is a nectar which is life-giving. Why? Because it gives non-death, right? Of course, that's a very wooden translation, which is why we'll go for something more flowing like life-giving nectar. But very literally, it's that which gives non-death. So what is this liberation? This liberation is life, right? Which again, I think very much goes against this Mayavad conception, right? Because this Mayavad understanding of liberation is death, right? It is a cessation of all that we are, right? Impersonalism is to kill the person, right? It is not to give eternal life to the person, right? It is not to give life or non-deathlessness to the person, right? So I think it's important to understand this. Okay, and now we go on to text 16 and to 18. And these ones, they're very Zen-like. I like them. They remind me of Zen koans. I don't know how many of you read Zen koans, but you probably shouldn't actually. but they're rather interesting. And this very much reminds me of it. So text 16. Nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate sataha, ubhayorapi drishtontas, pannayos tattvadarshibhihi. Maybe we can have Alex, would you like to read out the translation?
Yeah, is my microphone okay?
Pardon?
Is my microphone okay?
Yeah. Microphone's
Okay,
great.
cool. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both.
Yes. So here we find Krishna. He is describing two things, right? The non-existent and the eternal or the existent. Actually, again, to come back to the grammar, the words that he uses are sataha and asataha, right? So sataha, the eternal or the existent, and its opposite, right? Asataha. So it's actually very pretty. It's very poetic, right? It's contrasting, right? So the non-existent has no endurance, and of the existent, there is no change. Now, I can't remember if it's exactly this text, but I always, whenever I'm reading this section of the second chapter, and I'll make this point now, because it's either this text or one of the following texts, right? Often we hear devotees, they're discussing high philosophy, and they'll talk about Jiva Goswami, and they'll talk about, and they'll say, oh, Jiva Goswami says in this commentary here and that commentary there. And I think there's some value to that. I mean, I do that, and often I do it incorrectly. Not incorrectly, inappropriately, you could say. But other times I think it is appropriate. Srila Prabhupada does tell us to read the previous Acharya's commentaries. He does tell us to do all of these things after we've studied his books, but he does tell us to do these things. I don't think it's inappropriate. But I also think it's important to realize just how profound these books that we think are the basic books, right? We'll think these are the foundational books, and then you level up when you read the Goswami literature and all. Actually, the Goswami literature and all, in many ways, that message is already there, definitely in Chaitanya Charitamrita, but also in texts like Bhagavad-gītā and Ishopanishad. You can find the highest truths. Again, the highest truth of our philosophy, that Krishna is the servant of his devotees, is right there in the first chapter of Bhagavad-gītā, right? And so I always think of this pastime of His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj. His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj, as we know, if you listen to his class as well, what intense Shastric knowledge, right? He'll just be quoting like books that you've never even heard before, like boom, 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 like this. Amazing, amazing classes. If you've never listened to a class by His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj, please do that. It's a real experience. And so he was once asked by one of his disciples, Shiksha disciples, I'm now forgetting his name, but he was asked a question, because there's a little bit of a debate outside of our Vaishnav community about whether the svarupa of the jiva, the eternal form of the spirit soul, is it inherent in the soul or is it external to the soul, right? So if you don't get the difference, it doesn't really matter. We hold to the view that it's inherent, right? But essentially the idea is there some transformation in the jiva? Is the jiva transformed by the guru? Not transformed. Is the jiva assigned a form, and that form could have been any form, or is the form like a seed in the heart of the jiva? This is the debate, right? And so this disciple, he heard that while he was in Orissa, because obviously there's lots of Gauryas from every group, right? So he heard this while he was going around, and he asked Gaur Govinda Maharaj, expecting Gaur Govinda Maharaj to go, well, in Madhurya Kadambini, it says this, and and all that Gaur Govinda Maharaj said was, he said, Nasato vidyate bhavo, right? So he just quoted this text from 2nd chapter of Bhagavad-gītā, either this text or one of the later ones saying the similar point, right? And he said, there is no change in the Atman. So then how can we say that the form, the Sarupa, is attributed to it? How can we say that the form is something that's added to it if there's no change, right? So I just bring up that pastime because I think it reinforces that the Bhagavad-gītā really can speak to the most, how do you put it, the most niche, right, debates, right? The most high level complicated philosophy can be discussed in terms of Bhagavad-gītā, as can the basics, right? So again, I'm just saying that we should not think the Bhagavad-gītā is a basic text. And I know most of us don't think that, but I'm saying we shouldn't get into that gut feeling almost, because I feel we accidentally create this when we say save the acharyas for later. We get the idea, oh, now I've leveled up, right? Now I can read Madhurya Kadambini, right? And don't get me wrong, you can read Madhurya Kadambini, but it's not because Madhurya Kadambini is somehow giving something that Bhagavad-gītā did not. Yes, Nandan Prabhu?
Prabhu, just the point, given that, in your slide and in normal, Sastric use, the word sata and ashata is used for eternal and non-existent. In this verse, the word bhavaha is used. Or bhavaha. Is there any, have you found any reason for which there is this usage? Because it seems because I was thinking of the word bhava, which seems to be the root of it, which tends to be about a relationship or enduring relationship or something like that. And I also just didn't understand the word endurance being used in the context. You can explain.
So, and I won't bore you with too much Sanskrit, but in Sanskrit, we find words come from roots.
Yes.
And bhavaha comes from the root bhu. And
yes.
the root bhu, it's hard to give unless you have a real handle on it, but it's different than is, right? Often people translate, and even Prabhupada does, because sometimes it just makes better English, right? But often it's translated as it is, this is this, right? Ramo Nripa Bhavaha. I'm not good with composing Sanskrit, right? But that would mean most people would translate that as Ram is Nripa, a king, right? But it has more of a connotation of becoming. It has more of a, so Bhavaha, Sambhavami yuge yuge, right? I manifest myself, right? I manifest myself millennium after millennium. So Bhu has this sense of becoming, right? Of actually manifesting. And therefore, I think we can take this meaning of endurance, right? Because endurance is like this manifesting. As for bhava, referring to the emotion, I'd need to get back to you on the etymology.
Sorry, I didn't want to distract.
No.
Yeah.
Off the top of my head, I'm there is a way that you pull out that meaning. I'm just mind blanking it. We can.
Sorry.
No. It's all right. It's a good question. I'll get back to you on bhava. If I don't, we'll touch on a nectar of devotion. But I'll get back to you next week, or I'll message it to the WhatsApp group. I'm just off the top of my head, I'm blanking. But in terms of endurance, this word bhu often has this association of coming, right? Of becoming, of existence coming forth. And therefore, I think in this context, it's pretty clear that endurance means that it has that quality of properly manifesting, of having enduring manifestation. Whereas then we have the opposite, abhavaha. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah, and I'll get back to you on the bhava as in the emotion thing. Yeah. So as we go along, we find here, right? Those who are the seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existence, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, there is no change. This they've concluded by studying the nature of both. And we can see this, right? Of course, Krishna is not saying that your body doesn't exist, right? It does exist. This is heresy, apasiddhanta, to say that the body does not exist. It does exist. It is a reality. This material world exists. But what exists, ultimately, are the elements that have composed it. The body itself, that comes and goes, right? One day the body's there, the next day the body's not. The elements are there, the atoms are there, right? If you want to think of it in terms of modern science, right? The all of the quarks or whatever those subatomic particles are, you know, they all keep on going, right? And they'll take some other form. If we think of it in terms of Sankhya philosophy, the earth, water, fire, and air, which compose the body, they all go out, and you know, the earth, as it says in the Bible, from dust thou art, and to dust thou shalt go, right? The dirt, you know, the body goes, and in the form of ashes, it distributes back into the world, right? So like this, right? There is no meaningful eternity to the body. Oh, but there is a meaningful eternity to the soul, and therefore the soul can truly be said to exist, right? The body is like a vapor. We see vapor in the air, and vapor exists, but it also kind of doesn't exist. You know, vapor, fog, mist. They're there in the air, they exist, we can see them, but they don't have any substance to them, right? This is what the body is like. Therefore, also, for another biblical reference, in the book, in Ecclesiastes, it begins, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. He's talking about the material world, but that word vanity can also be translated as a vapor or futility, right? He says, all around me, all I see is futility, because none of this actually truly exists in a meaningful sense. Again, we're not going to say apasiddhanta and say the world does not exist. Sometimes devotees will think this, right? The world doesn't exist, only Krishna exists. Well, the world exists as well, because the world is Krishna's energy. What doesn't exist are all of the lies we make up about that material energy. Which is why when we use something in Krishna's service, then we can say it truly does exist, right? Because we're no longer living that lie, right? Of this is me, I am my car. That's what they say, Purijan Prabhu. He says ahankar, right? The word ahankar, often we say aham means me and kar means, you know, to do or to work out, right? So ahankar is that by which I can say, you know, by which I falsely say I and mine, right? But Purijan Prabhu says in this modern world, we should realize ahamkar means I am my car, right? Which means in the sense that we invest our identity in everything, and that is a lie, right? What happens if somebody is driving, right? You're driving your car, zoom, zoom, right? And somebody bumps into the car and the other person comes out angry. What does he say, right? He says, oh, you hit me, right? He'll say that, oh, you hit me. You idiot, look where you're driving. You drove quickly and you hit me. But he didn't hit him, right? He hit his car, right? But we identify with all of these things. This is what ahankar is. And so we spread out that lie, right? That complete lie, I am my car and I am my body. It's the same thing, right? You hit me means you hit my car, right? And in the same way, we can say our bodies, right? We say this is me, but this is not me. And this is the lie, right? The lie that my identity is this transformation of a few elements right here, right now. So let's keep going. Text 17. Avvinashi tu tad vidhi yena sarvam midam tatam vinasham avyayasyasya na kaschit kartum arhati. Okay, maybe we can have Rohan Prabhu. Would you like to read out the English?
Yep. That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy the imperishable soul.
Yes, Jai. So here we find we're coming now to, well, what is eternal then, right? So Krishna is talking about what actually is eternal. So that which pervades the entire body. So this is the description of the soul. Now we find in the purport the very famous description. How big is the soul? Who can tell me?
This was
1/100th of the portion of the tip of the 100th portion of the tip of the hair.
Yes.
1/10. Is it 100 or 1/10,000?
10,000.
1/10,000.
Yes. So often devotees will read this description. I think sometimes devotees miss the point. Sometimes devotees will look up now with big microscopes. We can actually find the width of the hair, and then they divide that by 10,000, and they and then they say, well, this now is the size of the soul. I don't think that's exactly what they were getting at. The whole point is we can't measure it, right? It's very, very small, but it's not captured within our 3 or 4 dimensional material world. That's more what it's getting at, right? It's not that now that we know the size of a hair, we can actually calculate the size of the soul, right? So sometimes we can get a little too excited, right? Actually, the point is that it's very, very small. We cannot measure it. We do not have materials to measure it, because elsewhere we'll find different. Also with the Paramatma, you'll find different descriptions, and you'll find the descriptions give different sizes. And people will say, "Oh, contradiction! I can't believe in the Vedas anymore," right? But actually, it's because you're missing the whole point, right? The whole point is that it's very, very small. Yeah. Oh, the chat is fired off. Yes, exactly. So sometimes we can be victim to fundamentalism and argue that anyone who's saying that's not the entire point, heretics. But yeah, so it's not saying that the text is wrong. Obviously not. I would never want to say that. But I think the point is that it's very, very small, right? Because what do we see here, right? The first text says that that when you take the portion of the hair and divide it into 100 parts, and then 100 parts, I can't do the math. But anyway, so the point is that it's very, very small and it's immeasurable. But in spite of the fact that it is so small, what does it do? It pervades the whole body. Now, what is the Sanskrit for this? Sarvam idam tatam. Yena sarvam idam tatam. It pervades all. And there's 2 general meanings we can take from this. One is that it pervades all of the material body, which makes sense because in context, what are we talking about? We're contrasting the material body to the soul, right? And this is the definition that Srila Prabhupada has gone with, right? So it pervades the body. And what a miracle, right? That this small spark gives light. All of the value of the body is found in the soul. Again, that is why it is true. It is that which is of value. If you take all of the elements that compose our body and break them down into carbon and hydrogen and whatever goes into our body, I think somebody added it up. It's something like $20 worth, right? It's $20 or $30 worth of elements in our body, right? And you might be thinking, well, life insurance sure is a scam then, right? But actually, the reason why life insurance, I mean, it still is a scam, but the reason why we would not be happy to say a human's worth $20 is because of the soul, right? The soul is what gives it that value. Srila Prabhupada gives this really wonderful example. At the funeral, we cry, right? But the body has all of the same elements as it did before death, right? The heart is still there. All the organs, other organs are still there, right? The face is still there. They've even beautied up the body, right? They make it very, very, in Australia at least, they make the bodies very, very beautiful, right? At the funerals, right? They've beautified it all up, right? And yet everyone mourns that body they used to smile when they see, now they cry when they see it. What can cause such a drastic change? The soul has left the body. So this is one point. Oh, there's the chat going off again. I thought kidneys were its. Oh yeah. So kidney is, but if you break the kidney down into its particles, into its elements, then it isn't worth much. Then it's just one trip to Bunnings. So it pervades all. Now another meaning that can be given is that it literally pervades all. It pervades all of the material world, and that also is true, right? And not in the sense that myself, the jiva that I am, pervades all of material existence, nor the sense that you, who you are, pervades all of material existence. Rather, that all material existence is pervaded by jivas. We do not accept, right? Often, and Mrinal and Shivam had to go through an hour of this last night. I was giving a class on evolution, so I hope they're not too bored by me bringing it up again. But often we will say, oh, we reject Darwin, we reject evolution, right? And often we focus, I think, on the wrong aspects and on the aspects that Prabhupada didn't focus on. I did a little bit of a study on this recently. I was just going through all of Prabhupada's comments on science and evolution, and we make a really, really big deal about how the forms of the bodies arose and fossils and everything. And that actually doesn't seem to be Srila Prabhupada's main emphasis. Srila Prabhupada's main emphasis is that it is consciousness that comes before matter, not matter that comes before consciousness, right? This is the main emphasis he's making. And actually, when you read the discussions, Prabhupada was very comfortable to sort of adapt, not compromise, but sort of say, oh, well, you know, if there is evidence about this, then maybe the case is this and this, right? Often I find, again, talking about Alex's fundamentalism, at times there's almost a fundamentalism devotees have, and anything the scientists say, no, bang, 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 we're not going to hear it, right? And that didn't seem to be Prabhupada's approach. But what Prabhupada was very firm on is that Krishna is the source of all reality. This doesn't just all happen by chance, and that there is a consciousness behind these forms, right? And this is our worldview, right? Consciousness comes before matter. When the universe is created, all of the spirit souls enter into the universe, and then all of matter is formed around them, not the other way around, right? Matter evolves around consciousness. And I don't want to talk about this too long, but this is a theory that's also popular among even atheistic philosophers and scientists. So it's a very plausible one that even atheists are saying, oh, well, you know, it's the only way to make sense of evidence. They just say there isn't any God to send all the souls out, which is, look, it's absurd, but they have every right to think that. So all of that to say, the jivas, they pervade all of existence, right? All of existence has spirit souls behind them. Matter is a product of consciousness, not consciousness a product of matter. And this makes sense, right? How can a lower thing produce a higher thing, right? How can a table, how could we say that how could we say that dead matter suddenly produces conscious life, right? When consciousness is so clearly distinct from dead life. Yes, so all of reality, everything from the rivers to the sun, and this is how we can understand. Sometimes people will think, oh, you know, this is all just simple-minded people. They saw the river moving and they thought, let's worship it. And then they created this idea that that river is a person, and then like this, right? This is how you'll often hear it described. But actually, we have to think about it metaphysically first. The whole world is filled with consciousness, right? The whole world is geared with consciousness behind it, because matter can only exist when consciousness is going behind it, right? So therefore, all of reality is driven by consciousness. And therefore, when we acknowledge that there is a deva in the sun, we're not just making some weird point that there's ancient aliens or something. We're making a very profound philosophical point that consciousness pervades all of reality. Yena idam sarvam. So it pervades all of reality. And because it pervades all of reality, and therefore we acknowledge that in some form or another, there's consciousness present there. We're not ancient aliens, conspiracy theorists. We're just philosophers, right? And it philosophically makes very much sense. Srila Prabhupada, there's one funny pastime. I'll just one pastime. I'll just bring it up because we've talked about a lot of philosophy. So Srila Prabhupada, one of his disciples once asked him, Prabhupada, in my body, there's so many cells and bacteria and everything, aren't there? Srila Prabhupada said, yes. And he said, so all of them have a soul, right? And Srila Prabhupada said, yes. So we can think how many millions of spirit souls are even within us, right? Besides ourselves. And then that disciple said, so then Srila Prabhupada, when I eat prasadam, they are all getting the benefit, right? And Prabhupada said, oh, wow, you are so merciful. You're eating for others and not for yourself. So like this, Prabhupada reinforced that, but also made the point, right? We can think like this, but at the end of the day, we are still most concerned with that asaptaha body that we are in right now. So we'll keep on going. There's so much more you can say, but as I'm sure you know, this theme comes up later in the Gita, so we can touch on it more later on. Also, as I said, because chapter 2 really is a table of contents, if you will, right? Contents of the Gita summarized for the rest of the Gita. So we'll go slowly through chapter 1 and chapter 2, and also through chapter 3 because it discusses karma. After that, we've discussed all the main themes of the Gita. So the rest of the Gita goes quickly, right? We spend a lot of time on these texts. So then the rest of the Gita, we can go smoothly through because the rest of the Gita really is just an elaboration on this second chapter, right? Especially once we get onto text 30, if we do get onto text 30 today. Once we get onto text 30 to 53, which I think was your reading. For those of you that did the reading, please do the reading, is actually very much a summary of the entirety of the Bhagavad-gītā. Those texts there, 30 to 53, they summarize the whole Bhagavad-gītā. You have the whole Gita, the whole yoga ladder and everything, the whole elevation from the lowest level to the highest level. It's all there. So yeah, all that to say, we'll go slowly through the second chapter and then we'll go quickly through not quickly, but we'll go to faster pace the rest of the Gita. And then what does Krishna say? The material body of the indestructible, immeasurable, and eternal living entity is sure to come to an end. Therefore fight, O descendant of Bharata. So here we find Krishna, he is making the opposite point, right? He's saying this body is perishable. It's anyways going to pass away. It doesn't really exist, right? Your compassion should be there for the soul, right? Yes, the soul is suffering, but that's not where your compassion is, Arjuna. You're not thinking, oh, the soul will experience some pain here, right? You're not thinking that, Arjuna. You're thinking, oh, this body is going to pass away. How will I enjoy it, right? You're holding on to the impossible, right? You're thinking, oh, I want this body to stay forever, but the body inherently does not stay forever, right? Therefore, do not worry. Do not be up. Do not worry. Do not try to change things. This is the way things are. And if you do feel sorry for the soul, the only way you will end the suffering of the soul, why? Because matra sparshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkadaha, right? No matter what, the soul is always suffering. The way to end the suffering, yes, that soul is going to suffer likely as it passes from its body. But the way to end that suffering isn't to prolong material existence. That's the way to prolong the suffering. The way to end the suffering is to elevate oneself and everyone else to spiritual Krishna consciousness. Does that make sense? So what he's saying is your compassion is misplaced. No matter what, this body is going to pass away. It's asattaha. And then we'll just quickly touch on this text in relation to that, and then I'll take the question. So maybe then we can have Uma Mataji, would you like to recite the Sanskrit?
Which was Prabhuji, 18 or 19?
No, the one I'm sharing on the screen.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
Rite ritham yat pratiyeta na pratiyeta chatmani tadvidyat atmano mayam yatha bhasho yata tamaha.
Jai. So, and also very, very good, very good. As I always say, reciting shlokas from Bhagavatam is a real, it's a real level up in difficulty compared to Gita shlokas. And then maybe we can have Divyansh Prabhu, I know your hand is raised for a question, but would you like to read the English? I don't think we can hear you, Prabhu. I think it might be some issue with your.
Oh, sorry.
Now
Hare
we can
Krishna.
hear you. Hare
I had it.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah, Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No
Oh
problem.
Brahmana, oh Brahma, whatever appears to be of any value, if it is without relation to me, has no reality. No, it has my illusory energy, that reflection which appears to be in darkness. Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. Thank you. So this is the point here, right? So this is the point Krishna is making, right? What is true, what is real, what is enduring, what is existent. We define this ontology, right? Things can exist, but they have no real value. They have no real reality, right? If it has no direct connection to Krishna, right? Now, this material world does have value because it does have a direct connection to Krishna. This material world has emanated from Krishna. But again, all of the illusions, all of the lies, all of the fictions we make about this material world, they do not last and they have no reality. So this is Krishna consciousness. Krishna consciousness is not saying this world does not exist. It's saying this world could exist if we were to dovetail it all in Krishna's service, right? So I just want to mention this so we don't misunderstand these texts. We don't fall into this understanding that this world doesn't exist, that this world is just a dream, right? This world, it does exist, but it could exist a whole lot more if we were to use it in service of Krishna. That's why it's often said this Harinam Sankirtan Yagya, right? This chanting of Hare Krishna, this preaching of the glories and qualities of Krishna. This is a yagya, this is a sacrificial fire, right? But it is a very different sacrificial fire, because every other sacrificial fire, it burns out. And there's only a few things you can put into it. There's only a few rice grains and oils and all. But this sacrificial fire of the Sankirtan Yagya, this is very, very different, because its fire does not go out and we can pour the whole world into it, right? And pour the whole world into it we should. And by pouring the whole world into it, we do not burn the whole world away, but instead we give the whole world existence and meaning. So this is what is meant. We should understand this. So Divyansh Prabhu, I will take your question.
Yes, Hare Krishna. So my question was, I think, in relation with the previous text.
Yeah.
So I think you were mentioning how Krishna is telling Arjuna that you should slay these people, slay the opposite army, because like there's already suffering in the material world. So does that mean like Arjuna slaying the enemies? Does that mean they're going to be liberated? Like, is that assured that they're going to that their suffering is going to end?
Yes, so that's a good question. Firstly, yes, that is assured. Anyone who dies in Kurukshetra attains liberation, right? Or they attain the heavenly planets at the very least, right? And everyone who did die in this battle, did attain liberation. However, that's not Krishna's exact point here. And I think it's important that you mentioned that, because it can be confusing. Krishna's point isn't kill them because they'll have a better time if you kill them, right? And I know you weren't exactly saying that, but don't get me wrong, but that can be sometimes the thought process we get it. Krishna's point is that this war needs to be fought, because otherwise it is your duty, right, to protect the world from evil, right? There is an evil crime going on here. There is injustice going on here. It is your duty to stop it.
Okay.
In the execution of that duty, in order to protect the world, these individuals might pass away. This is not, Krishna is not justifying killing. Krishna is justifying not lamenting or not avoiding doing what is right, even when it seems to materially disadvantage you, or if it seems to, or if it seems to impact your attachments, right? He's saying you are arguing earlier on in text, what is it? In text 16, I think it is. Krishna says, yeah, tattva darshibihi, right? He quotes, what does tattva darshibihi mean? Those who have seen those who are the seers of the truth, right? He says they have said this, right? They have said, do not lament about that which is existent. I mean, that which is non-existent, right? It has no meaningful existence, right? It does not continue. Why does Krishna mention them? He's chastising Arjuna. He's saying, you're quoting all of these shastras. Well, well, actually, I'm quoting the real seers of the truth, right? So the point is just that Arjuna is on the point of ignorance, establishing compassion, and therefore trying to run away from his duty, right? So again, it's not a justification of killing, it's a justification of doing what is right. It is a justification of doing one's duty, right? If Arjuna was going to say, as a genuine pure devotee, I'm just going to run onto the field and chant Hare Krishna, I think Krishna wouldn't have chastised that as much, right? But we have to remember that Arjuna right now is acting in a conditioned form. So the point Krishna is making is he's saying it doesn't make any sense. You're saying you're going to let all of this injustice happen in order to let bodies that are anyways going to pass away be kept alive. Worry instead about the soul, right? How many souls will be destroyed by you allowing this to happen, right? How, you know, and why are you not lamenting for the soul, right? You're lamenting for their bodies. Ultimately, they will always exist as their souls, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
And it was a good question because it's a nuance that's really, it's not obvious unless you really study Gita a lot, right? But it is an important nuance to have, because otherwise it seems like Krishna's just saying, yeah, killing's fine, like they'll just get a new body, go out on the street, you know, kill whoever you want, which is not what Krishna is saying, right? Krishna is saying, do what is right and do not be attached to the fact, to these material aspects. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for the good question. Okay, so then I'm not sure what I've put on the next slide. Okay, yeah. So ya enam veti hantaram yaschainam manyate hatam ubhautau na vijani to nayam hanti na hanyate. So texts 19 and 20 are interesting because they're actually paraphrases from the Katha Upanishad. As I've said, the Upanishads are very much the genre of this section of Bhagavad-gītā. Up until text 30, it's just like, it's straight pulled out of Upanishads, right? And text 19 and 20 go so far as to even be references to the straight up paraphrases from the Katha Upanishad. So neither he who thinks the living entity the slayer, nor he who thinks it slain is in knowledge. For the self slays not, nor is slain, right? The self is not killed. Why? Because it is eternal. And the self does not slay, because actually ultimately it is either Krishna or the body who slays, who's the cause of slaying, right? Again, we have to think of this in context. What is Krishna saying? He's saying, do not lament because you need to do the right thing, right? He is not saying, do not lament, you can't actually kill anyone, so just kill everyone. So yeah. Alex, I'll come to your question at question time. Just please remind me to come to it. Right? So I think as much as we've discussed the previous text, it's pretty clear what's going on here, right? So he's saying ultimately it's Krishna who kills, or ultimately, because you know God is the ultimate cause of all things, right? Or you can say that, well, it's a material body killing another material body. It's not the soul killing the other soul. Again, he's saying this in relation, therefore, do the right thing. If you do the wrong thing, this results to being a killer of the soul anyways. As Isha Upanishad says, when we discuss the Isha Upanishad, one becomes an Atmaha, right? Then one is a killer of the soul if they engage in ignorance, if they engage in immorality. Yeah. Okay, and then we come to the famous text 20. I'm pretty sure this is one of the shlokas you have to memorize on your key memorization texts. Najayate mriyate va kadachin nayam bhutva bhavita vana bhuyaha jo nitya shashvato yam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. For the soul, there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. He is not slain when the body is slain. Again, I think, obviously, we can talk a lot about this, but I think in terms of the flow of the Bhagavad-gītā, I think we've already established, right, what it's discussing. The one thing I would like to point out is here we find Prabhupada, he mentions in his purport, text 19 also has a related text in the Katha Upanishad. But yeah, Srila Prabhupada here, he's actually given us a reference of which text is being referred to. Na jayate mriyate va vipaschin na yam kutaschin bhabhuya kaschit jo nitya shashvato yam purano na hanyate hanyamane sharire. We find this often. The Vedic literatures, they reference each other a lot. Not to bring up trauma for those of us who went through HSC English, but there's a lot of intertextuality between the Vedic literature, right? A lot of intertextual references. We'll also find this text in the Isha Upanishad are paraphrased in the Bhagavatam. And when we get to the Isha Upanishad, we will discuss this. The other point is, again, this contradicts Mayavad. Not to hanker on about this, but this is really a focus that we'll have, at least for this section. How do Mayavadis get this, right? How can we say he has not come into being, does not come into being, and will not come into being, right? That's the whole point of Mayavad philosophy, right? That the jiva forgets that he is the Supreme Lord and therefore he becomes a jiva, right? It doesn't make sense, right? And he's unborn. Again, if he's unborn, in order for the jiva to be unborn, it has to have always existed in its current form, right? But there is a birth to the jiva in Mayavad philosophy. Anyways, there's a lot that could be discussed, but we'll keep on going. We also should mention the 6 transformations of the body, because this is a learning outcome and may or may not be in your exam. So these are the 6 transformations of the body undergoes. In contrast, again, so text 20, we can say text 19 to 20, they're really elaborating on the point that Krishna has made about the sataha and the asataha, right? So text 20, he's saying it is unchanging, right? Well, you know what is changing? The material body. And we find in Vedic literature, there are these 6 transformations, right? The body, it takes its birth from the womb of the mother's body, right? Then it remains for some time. And you might think, well, that's not a transformation, but the point is that the stopping of action, the stopping of change is itself a change, right? In order to lose momentum, you actually need to move, right? So that remaining for the same time, that means there is a change in the change, right? If you get that. Then it grows, it produces some effects, right? So you'll produce some more kids, right? Who will also have their own 6 transformations. Then eventually the body gradually dwindles away, it decays, it ages, and then it vanishes into oblivion. Done, gone, right? So this is these are the transformations of the body. And what do we find about the soul? None of these are true about the soul, right? It is unborn, right? It is unchanging, right? It is primeval, and it never ceases to exist, right? This list, it gives the 6 transformations of the body. It also gives the 6 things that the jiva is not, right? Which is born, right? Which is changing, which is diminishing, and which is capable of entering into non-existence. Okay, and with that, we'll take our quick break. Again, sorry, a little less interactive than normal, but I just wanted to get a bit of gain a bit of ground so we don't fall a bit behind, because we've been falling like 2 minutes behind after each session. So yeah, we'll have our 5-minute break, and then we'll keep on going on the next half. Thank you all. Hare Krishna. Okay, we'll keep going then. So then we heard, O Partha, how can a person who knows that the soul is indestructible, eternal, unborn, and immutable kill anyone or cause anyone to kill, right? So here now, Krishna, he's making this point, and he's stressing all of this. And I do think it's natural to think what we're all thinking, right? Which is, yeah, I can see how this is all true, but it's a bit rough to apply, right? How do I actually exist in that sort of consciousness, right? It's so disassociative, right? It's so difficult. And of course, we will come to that as the texts go on. This is what he's saying, well, the soul isn't holding the weapons, your body is, right? And it's not, it's already stuff we've established. And then we can say, why is there this repetition? This repetition is there because Krishna is really just trying to emphasize his point. That's what the previous acharyas say. Why is Krishna seemingly repeating the same thing again and again and again? On the one hand, he's not. He's introducing new nuance every time. But at the end, he's barely saying anything else new. The reason why it's a literary technique, he's doing it to emphasize it, right? This is my point. And then he says, Vasamsi jirnani yatah vihaya navani grihnati naro parani tattha sharirani vihaya jirnanya Jnani samyati navani dehi, right? And then maybe we can have Varun Prabhu. Would you like to read out the English of that?
Was it 23?
22.
Sorry, just give me 1 second. As a person puts on new garments, giving up old ones, the soul similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones.
So here we find Krishna. Thank you, Varun. Here we find Krishna. He's coming back to that central point, right? He's making this point, not the central point, but a point that he's making, right? It's natural for the soul to come and go, right? And this is a reality that we find, it shocks us almost, because modern Western society is so much built on this idea that let us ignore that death will ever happen, right? Now, this is a natural human instinct, but most cultures have been wise enough to teach people that death will always come. There's a movement in Western Catholic art and philosophy called memento mori. And if you see paintings from the medieval time, there'll always be skulls in them. And they're not being some edgy 13-year-olds. What they're doing is they're making a point that you will die, right? Memento, right? Mori. Mori is related to mrit, right? Death, right? Mrit in Sanskrit and mori in Latin, right? And memento, right? Remember it, ponder it. Remember that you too will die, right? This is a reality. And in today's society, and it's actually rather sad, because I think we find a lot of abuses in the dying industry, so to speak, right? In the medical industry as well, in relation to terminally ill people and all, because we don't give death any dignity, because we just want to pretend it's not there, right? It's this very ugly fact of modern society, especially. We want to ignore death. You know, anyone who's dying, they won't be a problem much longer, is unfortunately is this sort of mindset, because we don't want to have to deal with the fact that they remind us that we won't live forever, right? I personally think it's because of the rise of this real aggressive secularist atheism, sort of, which sort of tells you that, yeah, you know, if the height of your life is to enjoy, you know, is to enjoy all your senses, well, you can't exactly do that when you're dead, right? You can't exactly do that after you've passed away. And so death becomes a very inconvenient fact, right? Very inconvenient truth for modern society. And so, yeah, we can almost find discussions like this where we say, yes, death is certain, death must come. We find that horrific, but it was something that in the wisdom of every culture on earth, if you study Chinese culture, Western European culture, Native American culture, indigenous Australian culture, every culture on earth very, very much would keep this as a central teaching, a central point, that yes, you will die. You can't ignore that. Remember that, right? Keep that in mind. It's kind of important, right? And yet we've lost that. And because we've lost that discomfort that we have, we often translate to offense, right? We find it offensive to speak like this. And the reason for that is because we have this deep discomfort about it, because we are sattvaha, we are eternal, right? We are eternal spirit souls, and yet we have identified with that which is non-eternal, right? So of course it's going to be uncomfortable for us, because it's not in our nature to perish or to pass away. It's in our nature to be eternal, and we are eternal. But because we think we are what we are not, we are thrown into a situation, right? That I will stop existing, right? We are thrown into a situation that we are not made for. It is not our nature to experience this experience of, oh no, I won't exist anymore. And you never will stop existing. But you'll have this anxiety around it, because it is something uncomfortable and unnatural. So because of this anxiety, and because we've now entered into a very irresponsible society, in my opinion, all the world around, not just in the West, unfortunately, that can just say, well, yeah, let's just ignore it. And there's no thought of, well, what happens when I start dying? Because there is no thought about what happens when I start dying, because there's no thought about when I start dying, right? Anyways, so Krishna is very much building upon this idea. Yes, death is natural, and death is not something we should encourage or relish, right? Compassion is key, right? But sometimes it is compassionate to fight. Alex was saying, when I was talking to him, he was giving the example, right? If a policeman is seeing somebody getting robbed, it is not compassionate for the policeman to throw his weapons away and say, oh, how could I hurt this person, right? How could I attack this person? How could I do such an injustice, right? That's not compassionate. That's not good, right? On a personal level, it's not good to be vengeful, but it is important to do your duty, right? There's a duty of that policeman to maybe, left, right, good night, and help the person out, right? Okay. So in the execution of morality, in the execution of what is good, then yes, people will pass away, and people will pass away even if you don't do that. And they will put on new garments, right? Because the soul naturally, right? It naturally takes on bodies. This is the nature of the soul. Now it's interesting, what is the word jirnani? Jirnani means old and worn out, right? This is a reference to Bhishma and Drona. This is how our acharyas have said, right? Their bodies are old and worn out, right? So it's very explicitly, Krishna, he's not speaking abstractly, he's also speaking practically. Jirnani, old and worn out, and you know who else is old and worn out? Bhishma and Drona, right? Of course, these days we take that as insulting. So not only do we not have dignity for death, not only do we have a dignity for the natural role that death plays in life. Yes, it is horrific, but it's almost like manure, right? Manure, nobody really likes manure, I would hope, but it is, we use manure so importantly in order to grow crops, in order to make food, in order for life to exist, right? There is a cycle to life, and we've done a lot of damage by demonizing death, right? We don't have to enjoy death, right? We don't have to think death is nice, but it's like manure. It's one of those ugly truths that does facilitate the cycle of life. So I lost my train of thought. We'll just keep on going. I was making some point with that. But anyways, death is an ugly truth, but an ugly necessary truth. Oh yeah, so we've demonized dying, we've also demonized growing old, right? This is just natural, right? It is a natural process to just grow old. There's nothing bad about it. This is the natural function of the body. But again, because we have this idea, I must enjoy, and as we know, you can enjoy your best when you're at your physical prime. So therefore, aging is something bad, right? But aging is not something bad. So we take this as harsh. Krishna's just saying, oh, old bodies, but he's not saying that, right? There's a dignity to aging as well. Again, we are in a society that does not dignify a lot. So we can take these things as carrying much less dignity than they do. Text 23. Na chainam chidanti shastrani, nainam dahati bhavakaha, na chainam kledayantyapo, na shoshayati marutaha. But before we discuss this text too much, I want to make a point. And this point is regarding Krishna's instructions here, right? Because Arjuna, who can tell me on what grounds was Arjuna arguing for his case in chapter 1? And if you don't know, the purport's on the screen.
You mean Arjuna's Prabhuji reasons he gave to Krishna?
Yes, but what was he basing them on? Remember, we were saying he was basing them on a certain type of shastra, on a certain type of logic. Yeah. What was he basing it on?
Dharma Shastra, Prabhuji.
Yes, Dharma Shastra, right? So Arjuna, he was arguing in terms of Dharma Shastra. And our acharyas are saying, Krishna here, he's pointing out that there is something much beyond Dharma Shastra, right? Dharma is good, but beyond Dharma is jnana, right? Is knowledge, right? Beyond doing the right thing, there is also knowledge of reality. There's also knowledge of spiritual truth. So Krishna here, he is pushing Arjuna. He said, yes, Arjuna, you are right to stop looking at artha, to stop looking at how can I have a comfortable life. You are doing the right thing of going from looking, hey, how can I have a comfortable life, to going, hey, how can I be a good person? Now let's go to something higher. Higher than being a good person is to understand the truth, right? It's to understand the true nature of reality. So therefore, maybe we can have Jaswant Prabhu. Would you like to read out the purport?
Yes, Prabhu. The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire.
Oh, no,
nor
sorry.
moist-
The purport, Prabhu.
Oh,
On the
okay.
screen. Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
Sorry.
No. Yeah.
Arjuna argued that religious principles should be given more importance than politics or sociology, but he did not know that knowledge of matter, soul, and the supreme is even more important than religious formalities.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. And this is very important, right? Because this is a central theme we're going to find as we continue going on into this section of the second chapter, right? These things are much more important. There are higher and higher levels, right? The whole point of religion is to come to spiritual truths, right? Yes, there's some value in just being religious, right? There's some value in just following along with it. But if you are doing that and you are not growing deeper into knowledge of the soul, and not knowledge as in philosophy, but an actual realization, an actual experiential knowledge, right? Not just that you can sit down and harp on about philosophy. In many ways, that's as useless, right? As just executing religion. But if you can come into a deep realization of my identity, if you can go deeper into one's love for Godhead, right? If one can go deeper into their experience of loving God, this is the point of religion, right? And this is what Krishna is saying. Religion for religion's sake is pointless. Experience the truth, experience reality, and experience even beyond that, experience love. If religion is not done to facilitate those things, then throw the religion out the window. So this is Krishna's point. Krishna is very much following in that mood of our acharyas, that you can bend all the rules if it's for bhakti. And we'll find that as we keep on going on. So now, whoa. I'm not sure why this is here. I've put the slides in the wrong order. Anyways, so now, the soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, right? Actually, maybe Tarun Prabhu, can you read the English of text 23? And Shavina Mataji, can you read the text of the English of text 24?
The soul can never be cut to pieces by any weapon, nor burned by fire, nor moistened by water, nor withered by the wind.
This individual soul is unbreakable and insoluble and can be neither burned nor dried. He is everlasting, present everywhere, unchangeable, immovable, and eternally the same.
Sure. So here we find it. Thank you very much. Here we find these texts, they go together. They perfectly line up, right? So the first one is saying the things that can't be done, and the second one is saying why they can't be done, right? So they're both saying the same thing in two different ways. It's a very pretty section. I like these two texts. And it's sometimes mentioned by that actually when Krishna was saying this, he was pointing to the different weapons Arjuna had, right? So you're saying he cannot be cut by your regular arrows, right? It cannot be it cannot be burnt by your fire weapons, cannot be wet with the weapons you have based on water, and also your wind weapon. None of these weapons can do any of these things, right? So just an interesting detail. Krishna, they say he was gesturing to each set of the weapons, right? Bringing it home, right? What is the point? All of these weapons aren't going to do anything to the soul. So Krishna, he's making this point. Then, and we'll keep on going. Again, it's a tragedy we don't have 5 years to do this course instead of 2. But we can't go into every nice detail. But this table, I think, is nice to see how these texts line up, right? Because they're unbreakable, unable to be burned, insoluble, not able to be dried. Again, Mayavadis, what are you doing? Achedyaha. How can you say that there becomes division in Brahman? How can you say this if the soul is unbreakable, right? And then Krishna, he makes a similar point. Not Krishna, Srila Prabhupada, he makes a similar point that I made earlier regarding consciousness pervades all of reality, because we find this as well mentioned more explicitly here in text 24, sarva gataha, right? And sarva gataha is similar. Like, what does it mean, all pervading? Does it mean it pervades the whole body, or does it mean it pervades all reality? Srila Prabhupada this time takes it as pervading all reality. And he makes the same point, right? If the sun globe is uninhabited, then the word sarvagataha becomes meaningless. Again, he's not talking about aliens. Prabhupada's not going on some like weird conspiracy theory saying that, you'll get abducted at night or something. He's making a profound metaphysical point that consciousness is undergirding all of reality. Okay, then we get on. Avyakto yamachintyo yam avikaryo yamuchyate tasmad evam viditvainam nanusho chitum arhasi. It is said that the soul is invisible, inconceivable, and immutable. Knowing this, you should not grieve for the body. So again, Krishna, he's really at this point, he's concluding his point here. There is some nuance, but I don't want to get into the nuance too much. The general thrust is the same, right? When it says invisible, it means invisible to our senses, right? The spiritual world is purely composed of the same substance that our souls are made out of, right? So it's not that it's formless or it can't be seen. Instead, it can't be seen with the material senses, which is again the point. The point isn't that if we take a hair and measure it with a microscope and divide it, that's the actual size of the soul. The point is we can't measure it or see it with our material senses. And then what do we find? Atta chainam nitya jatam nityam va manyase mritam tathapi tvam mahabaho nainam shochittum arhasi. If, however, you think that the soul is always born and dies forever, you still have no reason to lament, O mighty armed. Now, O mighty armed is used sarcastically here. There's a general consensus, and Krishna, he's saying, oh, mighty armed one. He's making the idea that, oh, great one who is learned in all the shastras. He's making this word, oh, mighty armed warrior, you understand Vedic values well, right? So he's saying you wouldn't think this. You wouldn't think that there is no soul, right? But I'm still making this point anyways. And I love this text. This is one of my favorite texts in the Bhagavad-gītā. I think I say that with a lot of texts, but this is definitely one of them on the list, right? And I love this because of the first word, atta, right? If. Krishna here, he's really making a bridge, right? He's saying, even if you accept none of this, right? Even if you accept none of this about the soul, still we can reason about this. Still we can think about this. And this is making 2 points. One is that Krishna consciousness is actually, in one sense or another, everyone can be engaged in it, right? Even somebody who's atheistic, right, can in some way benefit from Krishna consciousness and therefore be engaged in it, right? In this sense, we mean Krishna consciousness in the grand, vast sense, right? They're only indirectly, implicitly connected to Krishna consciousness, but they still are. And Krishna is expressing that if, right? Even if here we have some wisdom for you, right? It's not only relevant to everyone, but everyone can be engaged in it, right? This is the value of this Vedic knowledge, even if you think this. Another thing that it's showing is we can be compassionate, right? We don't need to argue everyone into each and every point that we think, right? We can still give some points of value, some points of wisdom to people, even if we don't necessarily accept it, right? Even if they don't necessarily accept everything we're saying, right? We're not here to win arguments. We're not here to convince people to think the same as everyone. We're here to benefit everyone, right? And Krishna is showing that, right? Even if you don't accept the nature of the soul. And we can be sure that Krishna definitely does believe this, because he's just spent a lot of shlokas heavily arguing why this is the nature of the soul, right? So here we can see quite a few things. The other thing we can see, not only is Krishna opening this up to everyone, but he's also being realistic. Now we see a shift in Krishna's language. From here up until text 53, Krishna now, he's gone, he's speaking high philosophy, right? from up until now, right? He's saying all these high things. Oh, the the soul is not the slayer, nor is it slain, and these things are true. But like, who can actually act on that platform? Who can genuinely act on that sense of realization, right? This is all too difficult. Krishna, technically, he said all he needs to say, right? He said all he needs to say, but he keeps on speaking, right? Because it is impractical just to give the philosophy and run, right? This is not what we should do. Sometimes we find devotees are like this, right? They'll give the philosophy and then accept it or run, or go home, right? But this is not the approach of Krishna. Krishna's given the philosophy. I don't think we should water down the philosophy, but then he said, here is now incremental ways that you can come to realize this. You can come to understand this, right? Even if, right, he's giving him some way to understand this, he's going down now from the most theoretical, the most philosophical, to the most practical. Does that make sense? Okay, so what's the time? I know all of our attention spans are struggling. Again, I'm sorry, we don't really, I don't really have an activity for today. I did, but I've removed it because we got to catch up a bit, which is my bad. But yeah, so please keep muscling through. Next week we'll be back to having activities and all. But yeah, I'm just saying that, so don't guilt yourself if you're feeling, this is getting a bit dry. It's all right. Now, Prabhupada, he mentions two schools of philosophy in this purport. I'm just going to talk about this a bit because you don't really need to know it, but I just think it's interesting because he's mentioning these. He's gotten these from Baladev Vidyabhushan's commentary. Baladev Vidyabhushan mentions these. So these are the two schools. Prabhupada says there's schools that are like almost akin to the Buddhist, but that phrase would really only refer to the Lokayatika school, not the Vaibhashika school, because the Vaibhashika school was a really influential Buddhist school. Again, this is not Buddhist Shāstrī, right? And this is not a Charvaka Shāstrī. So we won't go deep into these philosophical schools. But in order to understand the point Prabhupada's making, I think you need to get a rough understanding of what these philosophical schools were saying. So in many ways they're similar, but in many ways they're different. The Lokayatikas say that the Atman, the self, the soul is just the body, right? It's just the body, right? And so this is one perspective we can take, right? If we say, as Krishna is saying, if you think that the soul is always born and dies forever, you still have no reason to lament, O mighty An, right? So if you think that it's gone, right? Because in Lokayatika philosophy, if the body is the soul, right? Then you still don't have to worry. They think the body is the soul. There is no soul beyond this body, right? So my soul is my body, right? There's no reason to complain. Why? Because, I'll quickly just come to this text from, sorry, that one slide is out of order, it's annoying. I'll just come from this text of Srimad Bhagavatam, and we won't recite it, but it says, "O eternally liberated, transcendental Lord, your material energy causes the various moving and non-moving species of life to appear by activating their material desires, but only when and if you sport with her by briefly glancing at her. You, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, see no one as an intimate friend and no one as a stranger, just as the ethereal sky has no connection with perceptible qualities. In this sense, you resemble a void." Now, I want to mention this because of the first line. Your material energy causes the various moving and non-moving species of life to appear by activating their material desires. This is one way to render, but another way to understand is that the material energy literally is the cause of all of these forms existing, right? Clay is the cause of a pot, right? Clay causes the pot to exist. There are other causes, but clay is one of them, right? So the point that's being made is the actual matter, right? Even if your body is all that's there, right? The body never actually dies, right? If the body is all that's valuable, the body never dies, its particles just go elsewhere, right? This is a very Zen teaching, right? And Krishna is saying, if you don't accept the nature of the soul, then yeah, right? So at one point, all the particles, all of the elements that made your body were different nutrients, different particles floating around, and then they made this body, but there's nothing else that defines the body than the matter that's in the body. So therefore, when the body dies, all that matter goes away, and it goes in all the rivers and the trees and everything, right? So it goes like that. So why would you lament? Because if all that you are is your body, then if all you are is your body, and all your body is the elements that make it up, well, the elements never stop existing. So there's no need to lament, because all that that person's identity is continues to exist, if it's manifest or unmanifest. And we'll touch upon this. There's a text later which says that much more explicitly. All created beings are unmanifest in their beginning, manifest in the interim state, and unmanifest again when annihilated. So what need is there for lamentation, right? Okay. Then we have the Vaibhashika philosophy, which is there, right? This is a Buddhist idea. And it thinks that there is a soul, but it says that the soul is not the gross body, as the Charvakas say, but it says that the soul is the subtle body, right? And eventually that subtle body is destroyed. So the Vaibhashika school is not so popular anymore, but the majority of Buddhism was heavily impacted by its interpretation, right? And so, yeah, in this case, also, one need not worry for much the similar reasons. What's interesting is this Charvaka idea is more popular than this Buddhist idea, which is why I focused more on this Charvaka. I want to focus more on this. The average person today thinks like that. Yeah, when I die, I'm just gone, done, boom, done. Buddha did neither, because Buddha was sort of an empowered personality, right? So he didn't necessarily do that. But yeah, Buddhists can extinguish their subtle body, and then they enter into the Brahman effulgence, right? But then they just fall back down into the material world, because the Brahman effulgence is boring. There's nothing to do, and people want to do things, right? So yeah, you can extinguish your subtle body. Same with most with some types of impersonalists, right? The impersonalists who don't have an offensive philosophy, and we'll come to them later, they do the same. They destroy their subtle body, but not and their gross body, and then they merge into Brahman, but then they drop down again because it's not fun just existing in vague light, right? I often think of like hospital waiting rooms, you know, that you stare at the tiles and there's all this bright light. Like, how boring would that be for all eternity? At one point you think, yeah, I just want to suffer in the material world again. That was a whole lot better, right? So yeah, anyways, so the Charvaka school, we see this all the time. Average person on the street says, yeah, when I die, it's like before I was born, nothing, right? I stop existing. Interestingly enough, there's even some Christians who hold this philosophy, right? Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, you might have heard of them. I don't know, has anyone ever been door knocked by Jehovah's Witness? Yeah, what they do is they go around, it hasn't happened over the past few years with lockdown, but their main thing, their whole idea is that if you don't do a certain amount of hours of knocking on people's doors and preaching to them, you'll go to hell. Well, not go to hell, like God just hates you, right? You just get banished by God, which is an interesting idea. But anyway, so they say, if you talk to them, they've door knocked me. That's what I'm saying. And I've talked to them and they'll tell you, oh yeah, your body is your soul, right? So I asked them, what is heaven? They say, oh, heaven just means that God brings back your body and makes it exist forever, right? So that's their whole conception, right? So we can find this conception is also there. The majority of Christians don't have this view, but it's interesting. Even some religious theistic people, yes, Seventh-day Adventists are vegetarians as well. What is interesting is Seventh-day Adventists aren't vegetarians for ethical reasons. They say there's nothing wrong with killing animals. It's just bad for your health. That's their thought process. So I remember, because they have the same idea. There is no soul. Animals don't have souls. Animals don't have souls. So, you know, like, what's wrong? What's wrong with killing them and eating them, right? So that's the, and humans don't have souls either. So I'd say, well, what's wrong with eating humans? But anyways, we're tangenting then. But yeah, so it's interesting. So we find this idea comes up a lot. And yet Krishna does not initially say, of course, Krishna says this is wrong, but he's also there to say, well, here, even if you do think that, even if you're at that platform, here's something that you can think about, right? And he's also making the point that what you're saying, Arjuna, it makes no sense on every level. Okay, so this is the philosophy that Srila Prabhupada is discussing. The question that I ask to Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists is, well, how is that me then, right? Because there's nothing connecting me to that body which is going to be recreated, right? If my soul is just my body, that won't be me. I won't be experiencing this. A copy of me will be experiencing this, right? Because I will have stopped existing. How will this same consciousness be experiencing that if there's no consciousness there, right? Anyways, we can talk about yes, as Alex has pointed out, this is not the mainline position for Christians, but it's interesting that some Christians do take this perspective. Okay, let's keep going. Oh, and here we find another text which is making the same point. Mahi gatvatam gatataha kapalika churna rajastato nuhu, right? Earth takes the form of a pot and then the form of dust particles, right? So earth becomes the pot and then the pot becomes earth once again, right? So that's the point that's being made there. Okay, we'll keep on going then. Then one who has taken his birth is sure to die, and after death, one is sure to take birth again. Therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament. Again, we won't touch on the next text because we have already touched on it, but I want to touch on this one just to make the point that I've been making this whole time. Krishna is not saying, therefore, go killing people. People misread the Bhagavad-gītā. Krishna is not saying, because of all these reasons, murder is fine. He's saying, therefore, because of all these reasons, do not abandon your duty to do what is good. Okay? Because what is he saying? Therefore, in the unavoidable discharge of your duty, you should not lament. Okay, and then we go into text 29. Text 29, I like to think, and please don't groan, but I like to think it's a very amazing shloka. Everyone always groans at that joke. It comes up in every Bhakti-śāstrī course. Every teacher has to do it. It's like an obligation. It's the unspoken learning outcome that everyone has to call this text the amazing shloka. That is because it does discuss amazingness a lot. Who would be comfortable reciting the Sanskrit for this? Who can I call upon? Karan Prabhu, did you unmute to recite, or?
I can recite, Prabhu.
Yeah, please go.
Ascharyavat pashyati kaschiddenam ascharyavadvati tvathaiva chanyaha ascharya-vachanaina manyaha shrunoti shrutvapyenam vedana chaiva kaschit.
Jai. Thank you very much, Prabhu. So, and then maybe we can have Shavina Mataji read the English.
Some look on the soul as amazing, some describe him as amazing, and some hear of him as amazing, while others, even after hearing about him, cannot understand him at all.
Right. So what's interesting here is grammatically, Ascharyavat can actually modify any of the terms, right? So this is a point that's often made. Ascharyavat can refer to the person looking at the soul, right? So the person looking on the soul, he's amazing because he can see, he can perceive the soul, right? Or we can say that a person amazingly looks at the soul because it's amazing that he's looking at the soul. Or we can say that some look on the soul as amazing, that the soul itself is amazing. We can do the same thing with describing him, right? The person who describes the soul is amazing. Wow, he's speaking this amazing transcendental knowledge. The person is speaking amazingly about the soul because, well, describing the soul is an amazing topic, or he describes the soul itself as amazing, right? Again, maybe it would be cruel for me to bring up math on a Sunday morning, but I'm sure there'll be one exponential equation to explain how many different ways we can render this text. What would it be? It would be, would it be 3 to the power of 3? I don't know. Don't ask me. I haven't done math in like 4 years. But yeah, we could do some exponential. There's a whole lot of different ways to divide it, and all of them are very nice, very interesting, right? And again, as Srila Prabhupada comments, Kathopanishad, right? The Kathopanishad also has a very similar text to this. Okay, so then, oh, there's a question. Yes, 3 to the power of 3, right? Yeah, okay, yeah, I just wasn't sure. I've lost my confidence with math. Okay, so then we keep on going, and then Dehi nityam avadyoyam dehi sarvasya bharata tasmat sarvani bhutani natvam shochitum arhasi. Maybe we can have Rohan Prabhu, would you like to read out the English?
Yep. O descendant of Bharata, he who dwells in the body can never be slain. Therefore, you need not grieve for any living being.
Jai, Jai. So now Krishna, he's come to his conclusion, right? As Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, the first line, the Lord now concludes the chapter of instruction on the immutable spirit soul. In describing the immortal soul in various ways, Lord Krishna establishes that the soul is immortal and the body is temporary. Therefore, Arjuna, as a kshatriya, again, not Arjuna as a random person who wants to kill people, but Arjuna as a kshatriya should not abandon his duty out of fear that his grandfather and teacher will die in the battle. And then Prabhupada writes in the last section of this purport, though the soul is immortal, violence is not encouraged. But when there is an actual need for it, it is not discouraged, right? Even then, when there is a need for it, it is not that we are encouraging it, but we're not discouraging it either, because you don't want to encourage violence, you don't want to encourage war, but there's a certain time when it's appropriate to set aside and not discourage it, right? That need must be justified in terms of the sanction of the Lord and not capriciously. And this is the point that I would make. We think of the horrors of war, and even this war is horrific, right? Again, that is why it is not encouraged, because it's a very horrific thing, right? But the wars we think of in recent time are even more horrific because they're done for no other reason than political maneuvering. One country wants what another country has, so boom, let's kill them, right? We don't like this other people, so boom, let's have a war. All of these wars, the Bhagavad-gītā does not apply to. So not to get political, but the Afghanistan war, that is not justified by the Bhagavad-gītā. The Iraq war, that is not justified by the Bhagavad-gītā. All of these wars are not justified. Even you could say, Srila Prabhupada, however, when he was asked these questions, he wouldn't get into specifics. He would just say, Brahmins should not fight, only Kshatriyas should fight. That would be his comments. World War II, I think you could debate it. I don't think it was justified. I think it was in retrospect justified. This is my personal opinion. I think it was in retrospect justified, but I don't think any of the countries fought it on those grounds. None of the countries fighting in World War II cared about the Holocaust. None of the countries fighting in World War II cared about the sufferings that the Jewish people were going through. America was filled with anti-Semites at the time. Anti-Semitism was incredibly popular. The whole world was fully anti-Semitic. In fact, the whole world was glorifying Nazi Germany. People don't realize that at the rise of Nazi Germany's popularity, most of Americans were saying, wow, look, these guys are doing it right. That's what they said, right? Because actually, what does Nazi stand for? I mean, not to get into a political tangent, but what does the word Nazi mean? It means National Socialist, right? The whole world was glorifying the Nazis because in many ways they were a really successful workers' union movement, right? They were there, but it just so happened that workers' union movement mixed in with hating other people, this mamakaha pandavaschaiva thing. And because they were workers, they thought, well, the rich are against us, right? And they fell into these anti-Semitic ideas that it's the richer Jews who are hoarding all our money, right? And that's sort of like, so it starts from a place which gets a lot of popularity and then it kicks off like that. And so the whole world was, a lot of the world really thought much of Hitler, right? They were thinking, wow, this guy, he's really fighting for the oppressed, right? And then becomes one of the worst oppressors in history. Again, evidence, it isn't a meaningful solution to anything. So yeah, so who was fighting in World War II? They were fighting, America just joined. America thinks that they saved everything, but they just joined because they got bombed, right? And Australia just joined because we're aligned with Britain, right? So in order to maintain our allegiance to Britain, that's why we fought. There was no reason why Australia should have fought in the First World War, because none of the First World War, it was a European war, right? None of it affects Australia, right? And why was Europe fighting? Europe was fighting because the land that they owned was feeling threatened by Hitler. Initially, they were very happy, all the European nations, to let Hitler do whatever he wanted, right? They only fought him because they were thinking, oh, now we're going to lose our land, right? Was it a just war? Yeah, I think it could have been a just war if they were fighting to liberate the sufferings that the Jews were suffering, right? Was that the reason why they fought it? No, unfortunately not. The narratives we like to tell ourselves are maybe much more shiny and sweeter than the actual ugly history of the very ugly nature that politics in the material world has. So yeah, an example of a just war. Again, I don't think there have been many just wars in history. In Vedic times, obviously there's many, right? Krishna fights in a few other wars, right? In Vedic times, we'll find Ramchandra when he's going to fight to save his wife Sita, right? That's a just war, right? Again, World War II could have been a just war. I'm not saying that we should have done nothing about the sufferings that Jews went through. I'm just saying all the countries fighting in that war didn't really care. Only after the fact it helps them out, right? It makes them seem more pious if they can say, oh, we really were so upset what is happening. But historical records show that wasn't really the fact of the matter. Okay. So then now we come now Krishna, he's making his full transition. And what's the time? I'll just quickly touch upon this, and then next week we will have an activity, so don't worry, it'll be a bit more engaging again. And next week will be our karma week. We'll be discussing this whole karma section, text 30 to 53, right? Because all of this section has to do with karma. However, it's split into two halves. The first half is about karma kanda, and the second half is about nishkama karma yoga or buddhi yoga. Don't worry, we will be defining those terms. So the first one though, this first half, text 31 to 37, Krishna, he's speaking on the lowest level, right? He's talking about material benefits, right? He's talking about what can I get out of this. In the second half, text 38 to 53, he's talking about buddhi yoga, right? Buddhi yoga is, again, we'll touch on it more, is what happens when you take knowledge that I'm not this body, I don't have, I should be detached from everything. What happens when you take knowledge and detachment and mix it with karma, right? That's when you get buddhi yoga, the karma, the activity of text 38 to 53. But first, before we get that, Krishna, again, this is the point I was making. Text 30, 31 to 53 are all making the whole process of spiritual life, the whole yoga ladder, right? And I'll have a picture of the yoga ladder again, but I did send the yoga ladder into the WhatsApp group. From the lowest levels of spiritual development to the highest level of spiritual development, we find all of this in text 31 to 53. And this section here is discussing the lowest levels, right? So Krishna now, he's coming down to that level, and now he's going to be discussing, even from a perspective of artha, right? Of what can I gain, of dharma, right? What can I gain? Even then, right? In a sense, he's continuing his even if logic, right? Even then, it makes more sense. And there's a few things we do have to comment about these texts, but those things take a little longer. So I'll comment upon them next week. But just to make a point, sometimes, I forgot who it is, but I think, I can't remember, one senior sannyasi disciple of Srila Prabhupada. I was listening to one class, and he said sometimes people call these texts the Al-Qaeda texts, because read out of context, it seems like Krishna is saying you can obtain all of these heavenly benefits if you fight in the war. Next week, we'll be discussing that they're definitely not that. for one, but secondly, we also need to take it into context. Krishna is saying, even if all you care about is benefit, talk about these things. Then in the second half, he'll start saying, but just ignore all of that because all of that's nonsense anyways. So again, we need to read in the overall argument. Okay, there's more we could say, but I think I want to pause for questions now. Before I pause for questions, reading, wherever you're up to, please just finish the second chapter. That's all. So finish the second chapter. That's the homework for this coming week. The last section really stands on its own. In many ways, the chapter ends at text 53, right? Text 54 is like its own completely separate nugget. Even chapter 3, when chapter 3 begins, it begins as an explanation of these texts here, text 31 to 53, right? Arjuna's question, which he asks in chapter 3, is regarding this content. That section at the end is really a standalone section. Of course, it ties into the themes that have been discussed today, but it does stand alone. Okay, again, my sincere vanchakalpa dhrubhyascha pranams to all of you for just talking for 2 hours nonstop. I know it's a little dry, it's a little hard to focus, but yeah, again, especially we were discussing a few things at the beginning and then this and that, and we were just falling a bit behind schedule, and I didn't want to fall too much behind schedule. So we'll be back to the normal format of mixing things up a bit again next week. Are there any questions? Vidhi Mataji.
Prabhu, if it's a little out of context, but the topic that you touched today of war, right? We can say that there are no justified wars. None of them are religious, and everybody had their vested interests in the war. But if I take the focus away from the war, we all have our personal battles. So that's a war that we are all fighting, you know, when it comes to our ideologies, when we stand up for something which is not appropriate. So instead of saying war, if I can bring in some examples like the individual movements that were happening, revolutions that happened, for example, the apartheid movement, against the apartheid, or the struggle for freedom in India from the British Empire. Now they all did that. It was not a war, it was a revolution. It was for certain values. Would that not be religious then? I mean, I'm not saying it's for God, it's for holding up your rights, your values that you have. Would that not be classified as justified? Because that's what we fight every day, right? It's not a war kind of a situation, but we always fight for something which we feel that we should stand up for. Would that be justified?
So with the independence struggle, that's a good example, because this is one we find our acharyas to comment on, and people often find it a little difficult. I think this is one of the more difficult things to solve. But Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, when Srila Prabhupada in the Lilamrita, we hear Srila Prabhupada, he went to Srila Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, and he was saying, he said all of the independent stuff, and Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada said, "You're wasting your time." And we again, because we do know lots of horrific things happened during the colonial era. I'm not trying to diminish that or anything. In fact, that's the very reason why sometimes it's a little hard to hear that, right? But he's making this point. He's saying, what will the meaningful change be? We have all of these struggles. Yes, they are on the religious platform, but they're not on the platform of the Bhagavad-gītā. You could argue they're on the religious platform, rather, I should say. But irregardless, they're not on the spiritual platform. They won't actually meaningfully do anything. And this is the nature of the material world. And this was Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada's comment. He was saying that, yeah, we'll be free from the British, and then we'll find another way to be exploited by the material energy, right? Either way, we are a slave to our senses. We are slave to material nature. So this is the point that Krishna is making, is he's saying there is a logic beyond doing what is good. There is a spiritual logic which is transcendental. This is the point of the Bhagavad-gītā. Arguing whether independence is good or not, I think you can definitely make that point, and I'm not arguing against it. Instead, I'm sort of dodging the question, but I'm dodging the question based on the basis of the Bhagavad-gītā, which is that there is something beyond then a logic of doing what is right. It is doing what is spiritual, which is transcendentally right if you will, right? It is about making a transformational change, because at the end of the day, look at South Africa. Even after apartheid was I think very rightfully, don't get me wrong, I think it's good that apartheid was overcome. I think it's very good that that colonialism was ended in India. Don't take my words wrong. But at the end of the day, do we really see that life is a whole lot better in South Africa? I mean, look at the violence and riots that have just been happening recently, right? Clearly, the problem is still there, no matter which political system we adjust. So yeah, you could argue that one political system is better than the other, but ultimately they're all material. And until you have a spiritual solution, does that make sense? Until we have a spiritual solution, it's not really there. So Arjuna fighting is also, Arjuna fighting, we'll find later on, can be justified in two ways, right? And both ways aren't necessarily related to him doing purely what is good. On the one hand, if we take him as a conditioned soul, he's doing this because this is the best level for him, right? He is conditioned, and as a conditioned soul, he needs to gradually go to become elevated to the highest platform, right? So because of that, he should do his duty detached from the fruits, right? And this will elevate him higher. And this will be what we will be discussing next week, right? So from this perspective, he's doing it because that's the level he's on. He can't go onto the transcendental platform, but he's doing so in order to progress spiritually. But on the sense of treating him as a pure devotee, Arjuna, he's doing this because Krishna wants this pastime to happen, and Arjuna is just doing the will of Krishna, right? But neither of these is necessarily that we should do good things in order to get good results. Krishna does discuss this in this section here, right? 31 to 37. But that is the lowest level of consciousness and isn't necessarily one we should dwell in. Again, I'm not saying that those are bad things, but the consciousness that we should do this in order for goodness to thrive is actually a lower sense of consciousness than the higher ones. I'm not getting too much deeper into that point because that is the focus of next week, right? But does that make sense to a degree?
It does. I feel that, you start from the lowest level. So you start with the revolution, but then somewhere you lost track then. And instead of elevating yourself further, we've just lost track. So that revolution has led to more, how should I put it? More decline in the society rather than the upliftment of the society.
I think it's more that the revolution was flawed from the beginning, because it's inherently a material political solution to a problem that can't actually be fixed. That's the thing. And that was the point Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada was making. He wasn't saying British colonialism was good. He's saying there is no solution on this material political platform, right? And that's so it is flawed from the beginning, and it isn't a meaningful conclusion. And again, it's difficult to hear. It's difficult to hear, right? It was difficult for me to hear as well. But it does make sense, not just as just navel gazing, but even if we look at history, right? How many times have we had political solutions that will solve everything, and we find they solve very little, right? Do you get what I mean, right? I'm not saying that colonialism was good, far from it, right? I do think it was good that India didn't get out from colonialism. But what I'm saying is a politically good shift is inherently going to be flawed. It's inherently tainted by its material nature. And therefore, Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada, he said, what's the point of spending your time doing this? More meaningfully, spread Krishna consciousness, and then we will have a substantial revolution.
Yeah.
It becomes very difficult from that standpoint to take guidance on what do you do, what do you stand for, and what do you not do, in the sense that even the political system, even in democracies, there is a voting, and you have to have a yardstick of some sort, says, I vote for this. Again, it is not really solving the core problem. The British, what they were doing to a lot of families at that time, like taking the woman away and all those kind of things were happening. For that family, it's difficult to say, I would spread Krishna consciousness. He will have to stand for his family and shout, maybe fight, maybe die for it. I think it's maybe the context was different. The context was more to sort of because he was Brahmana and saying, you know, for you, if you go fight, you're going to, you don't really have skills, so don't worry about that. You're meant for something else. I don't know. I find it, Prabhu, as you said, very difficult, because coming from Indian background and read a bit of history about what was happening at that time and what British was doing, it's a bit difficult pill to swallow that it was okay and not to fight for it.
So, and that's the point I need to make. I'm not saying it was okay. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada's comment was that you won't meaningfully stop things not being okay unless you have a spiritual revolution. So people often, it is difficult even when you understand that, but often people misread that, and they misread Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada saying that, oh, this is all just fine, don't worry about it. He's not saying it's fine. What he's saying is we will never stop having injustices. I mean, did injustices continued after India's independence, right? And there's many terrible moments in history as well. Maybe I'm not on the same level, right? But there's still a lot of sufferings. There was still a lot of, you know, we can go into the history of it. Just interesting to note, Prabhupada was not a Brahmin by birth, right? Yeah. And also, or by activities, really, right? Prabhupada is in a, or was he a Brahmin? Bhaktisiddhanta, actually, no, I'm pretty sure Prabhupada was not a Brahmin. I know Bhaktisiddhanta and Bhakti Vinod definitely were not Brahmins, but Srila Prabhupada, I think, also was not a Brahmin by birth. Yeah, so the point isn't that you should do nothing. The point is that you should not, that will not fully make a meaningful change. When he says it's a waste of time, yeah, he's not saying that the person who's individually being oppressed is having an issue. What he's saying is that no matter who's ruling, when there is a transformation, he's saying there is an issue, but the only meaningful solution ultimately is Krishna consciousness, right? So it's not saying that there should be inaction. What he's saying is that all of this action will perpetuate the issue, right? And we can see this as well. Like, I don't think anyone would say that India post-independence up until now became perfect, right? And there was lots of terrible things that happened as well. Not as bad as colonialism, but what Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada is saying is he's saying that how about we end all of the problems altogether, right? How about we stop settling for shifting one bad situation to maybe a less bad situation? I don't think he was saying necessarily that India shouldn't become independent, right? I think what he was saying is that all transformations of the material world inherently are going to be sufferings. And at one point, yeah, it is just a difficult thing to swallow, right? And this is why Bhagavad-gītā is sometimes, it's not for the faint of heart, right? It is really challenging us. I'm not going to try and tell you that it is an easy thing to swallow and explain it away, because just to one degree it isn't, right? And that's why we are all Arjunas on the battlefield, because we all find some of these things hard to swallow, right? And that's why, as we keep on going on in this chapter, we will find that there's descriptions of how can we come to a higher level of realization of this, where it is maybe a little easier to swallow, which is the whole point of this next section that we'll be discussing next week, right? Which is talking about what role does doing good actually have, because it's not something we should discourage, right? It does play a role, but I don't want to answer this. I don't want to get much deeper into that specific point, because that will be all of next week's discussion. But yeah, no, it is hard to swallow, and but it is what it is. But it also isn't what it seems like. It's not that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada is saying that how do you put it, Indian independence is bad, or that the suffering isn't there. You know what I mean? But he's just saying that we have to think in terms, spiritually speaking. There is no solution other than Krishna consciousness, ultimately speaking, right? And so we might do independence, and maybe we should, right? According to economic calculations. But his point is that economic calculations, political calculations like this, ultimately won't meaningfully cause that shift. It's difficult, right? But yeah, next week we'll touch upon this more. We can maybe touch upon this a little more next week, once we've discussed a bit more about this point, because we haven't really fully got into it, if that makes sense, right? Once we get a little more into the relationship of doing good, good action and everything, then I think we can have a more efficient conversation on this, if that makes sense. But yeah, no, I think it's natural to feel a little uncomfortable with it. I think if you don't feel challenged by the Bhagavad-gītā, then I think what is the point of having the Bhagavad-gītā, right? It's there to challenge us. If it doesn't challenge us, if it doesn't make us look at things differently, then yeah, what is the point of it being spoken, right?
Yeah, Prabhu, I think the way I was thinking it, my logic was stemming from Bhagavad-gītā, that Krishna was saying Arjuna to do your duty. And I mean, Krishna is like, that is an exception because God himself is saying, do this. And then all the logic is you can put aside because you may not even grasp the gravity of it. But to do one's duty is, it's where does the boundary of that duty is. You have a duty to your family, like we justified the war with the Rama, that he did it for his wife. But there is also the boundary of responsibility to your community, and then expand it to the country and expand it to the whole world. So it's to what extent do you feel your duty, your responsibility will be your boundary of your duty to the level you feel responsible.
Yeah.
And that's where people do things thinking they're doing it for the good of, in the sense that they are executing their responsibility. I'm saying in the context of freedom, that's where sort of my reasoning was based on.
Yeah, I get where you're coming from, and Prabhupada will write in one purport. He says, so long as we're conditioned, we do have roles to play in terms of varnashram, right? As long as we're conditioned, we do have a duty and responsibility. Even though it becomes harder and harder to execute that, right? As varnashram becomes more and more decayed, right? It becomes harder to execute those duties, but we do have those duties, right? We have those duties to protect and all, and it's not bad to execute them. The point I think that Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada is, yes, as Srinivas Prabhu was saying, Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Prabhupada is making, is that this is transcendental. This is, you should do these good things, but you shouldn't think that this will be the solution to all of your problems, right? This might make it easier for you to execute Krishna consciousness. This might make a more stable life. This will be you doing all of these things, but ultimately it's not an ultimate solution. And therefore it is a waste of time, right? He's not saying it's a waste of time in that it won't actually achieve anything. He's saying in the grand scheme of things, if you're not preaching Krishna consciousness, then there is no point to independence. Do you get what I mean? He's not saying, how do I put it? He's not saying that it's a waste of time altogether. What he's saying is unless you're allowing Krishna consciousness to be spread, then there won't be any meaningful solution. So do you get what I mean? He's not saying don't engage in the independence movement. He's saying the independence movement is flawed because it is not based on principles of Krishna consciousness. That was what he was saying. Does that make it a little clearer?
Yes, probably.
Yeah, so yeah, that's what I'm saying. People take it wrong. People take it as the idea that Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur didn't really care about politics either way, really. You wouldn't be able to say he was a freedom fighter, but you wouldn't really, I think you'd be going too far to say he was against it altogether. He was saying that, it reminds me, Prabhupada would say, why don't we build hospitals, right? Don't we have a duty to build hospitals? That's what one person once asked Srila Prabhupada. And Srila Prabhupada said, so many people are building hospitals. How many people are preaching Krishna consciousness? Yeah, so I'm not sure if you can see how that relates to this, but Bhakti-siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, I think he was fully committed to, yeah. I think Katyayani Prabhu very much. I keep on saying Katyayani Prabhu. I say it and I realize it's wrong every time. Srinivas Prabhu. Srinivas Prabhu has written it very nicely, right? Highest duty relies on Bhagavad Dharma. The ultimate duty, the ultimate responsibility, this relies, this is Krishna consciousness. And then Varnashram Dharma and all other ethical questions, they're secondary to this. Varnashram without Bhagavad Dharma is pointless. Doing good things without establishing Bhagavad Dharma is pointless. But Bhagavad Dharma, while also doing what is good, is fine as long as it's done on that platform. Again, we will go into more detail on how that gets acted out, but it is still also a little bit intense. But yeah, next week we'll touch upon this a little more. Does that at least address some of the intense reaction to it, or is it still difficult, Prabhu?
I think it's still difficult. I'll be very, very honest, because
no, that's all right.
come to that platform to really accept everything that goes on around us. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm not disputing what our gurus have said.
For sure not. And I'm not accusing you of that. Just quickly before you keep on going, I just want to say, feel free to say what makes you uncomfortable. That's why I said that. I realize things will make us uncomfortable. Again, sadhu means to cut, like it's a very uncomfortable, it can be uncomfortable at times. I don't want us to lie and just have this fake feeling where, oh, it's all fine dandy when some things are uncomfortable. And I think that discomfort often comes from a very good place, right? I think we should really reason with that discomfort and not try to brainwash ourselves, right? You get what I mean? Yeah. So
Correct.
please
Absolutely.
keep on going.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I also do want to say that I'm not accusing you of disagreeing. Like, I'm sure we all agree that we accept the teachings of our acharyas, but we can feel uncomfortable with them at times and try to reason with them. There's no issue with that. And Prabhupada was never upset when his disciples did that.
Thank you, Prabhu.
And please, I didn't want to cut you off. Please keep on making your point. I just wanted to clarify that.
No, I totally get it. It's just that, we have to bring ourselves to that level of understanding. Probably we are not there. So
yeah,
that doubt is fine, but then doubt is good because that's what's going to drive you to your answers then.
Exactly. This is what Bhagavad-gītā is showing us. Arjuna is having doubts way worse than those doubts, right? And way worse than those doubts, Arjuna's doubts are. And so Bhagavad-gītā's process is how to understand these things, right? How do we understand these things? We should feel challenged, right? Again, Bhagavad-gītā would be useless if it didn't challenge us. But on the other hand, and that's the beauty of being challenged by Prabhupada, Bhagavad-gītā as Prabhupada has given it, because we won't be challenged in the wrong way. Often people will overdo the challenge, and that's also what I'm trying to say, that's why I'm saying things like we don't need to become emotionless and stuff like that, because people overdo the expression of the challenge, right? Also, feel free, anyone, to leave. You can also stay. I'm not kicking you all out, but I'm just saying, very much feel free to leave. Again, I'm acknowledging that it's a difficult discussion because it is. I'm not saying it's a difficult discussion in order to say you shouldn't feel that it's difficult, right? It is a complex question. Yes. Also, as what Rani Mataji has said, if all were realized and knew the real purpose of life, there wouldn't be wars. So this is what he's saying. And not only that, I would say that only if one is realized, there won't be any wars, etc. Right? All that to say, I'll just make a few final points on that, just to take on, just so you don't think I'm saying something that I'm not, and you're particularly offended, right? It is not the point that Indians did not suffer a lot under colonial era. It's not that the colonial era is one of the greatest tragedies of the world. It's none of that. It's not that it should be underplayed or ignored or treated as, it was just something that happened, get over it, right? This is not the point at all. It's that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he's speaking the same as Krishna is speaking. Arjuna, again, a great personality, had a great understanding, and he's feeling very, even though it's a pastime, but he's feeling very challenged by these things. He's speaking in a challenging way, right? But I'm not saying anything to diminish either the great work of all of the independence workers. I think they especially on the material platform, they did many great things and are very impressive people. Nor do I want to diminish the sufferings and real crimes that happened under the colonial era. It's just about shifting our perspective to the Bhagavad-gītā perspective, which again is a challenge, and that's why we're studying Bhakti-śāstrī. So hopefully, I hope this doesn't disturb you too much, but I hope it disturbs you a tiny bit, right? Because that means we're learning, right? That means we're going deeper into the questions of the Bhagavad-gītā. Yeah, as you've already said, we're not challenging Prabhupada, but we shouldn't brainwash ourselves. Yeah. Vidhi Mataji, I hope at least for now, that doesn't make you want to give up studying Bhagavad-gītā.
Not at all, Prabhu. No, not at all. Thanks for.
And I hope the same for you, Tarun Prabhu. I hope you realize that I'm not saying anything to dismiss the sufferings or anything, and neither are our previous acharyas. I'm not saying anything. Who should care what I say? What I'm repeating is not trying to dismiss any of those sufferings or pains. It's just trying to shift perspective.
Yes, I get that.
Yeah. So please don't be scared away from studying Bhagavad-gītā or get upset about it. It is a little bit difficult, but it's also not heartless either. And we'll discover that as we go deeper into this chapter. Yes, so please don't get too disturbed. This is the don't get disturbed that you're getting disturbed, if you get what I mean.
Prabhuji, my concern is more for myself than for freedom fighters, to be
Oh,
honest.
okay, yeah.
I need to know what I need to do.
Well,
Because I do take stands every now and then. I do things, stick my head out and get into a lot of troubles as well.
Yeah.
And those are the things I need to have my sort of measuring yardstick. What do I do, or what I shouldn't do rather?
Yeah.
That's why I said we have individual wars, right? We are all fighting individually. We have situations where we have to take a stand. So that's where the disconnect happens, that, yeah, but
oh, okay, yeah. That all of these questions we will discuss next week. That's literally what this whole section of Bhagavad-gītā is about. What do we then do if we're not on that platform, right? That was the point I was making. So Krishna, he establishes this highest truth, so hard to realize, and then he says, okay, Arjuna, you're playing the pastime of somebody who isn't on this platform. Now I'm going to drop down and I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do. We will discuss all of that next week. Okay, sorry, I thought it was more of an issue, because I often get people get really disturbed with the freedom fighter comments, because I think they slightly misunderstand it, right? Or they think something is, or also they just feel, that's why I was focusing on that. More for practical application, and also in regards then to understanding history, we're discussing that next week. That's all of next week's discussion. Yeah, that's all of next week's thing.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Okay. Okay, I hope that addresses it. Enough that we'll touch upon next week. Okay. Yeah, a little bit of a difficult note to end that on, but sorry to leave you on not the most nectarian thing, but maybe a more difficult thing to process. But please don't shoot the messenger. I'm just relaying what our acharyas have said. Alex, you have a question?
Oh, it's actually just drawing attention. Nicole had a question in the chat.
Oh,
she said,
sorry.
but it's a really cool question. It's strange. It's like, did the characters in the Gita know that the Gita was going to come out of it? I just think it's kind of funny. Like, it's a funny question.
Krishna, obviously Krishna did, right?
Yeah.
I think Arjuna would have had a hint of it, but I don't know their minds. But
what about, like in chapter 1, you've got the Pandus and the Dhritarashtra and all these guys.
Yeah.
Like, do you reckon they knew that there was going to come out of it?
I don't know. Like, I'll be honest, I don't know. But they knew they were hearing some eternal knowledge, because the Bhagavad-gītā was spoken before. This is not the first time the Bhagavad-gītā spoke. In the first,
and they all knew, but they all knew that they were making history. Like, this was big. Like,
well, I think some of them might have. Other ones were definitely just more concerned about winning a war and taking some land, right? So yeah.
Also, as long as we're not keeping you. When you say the Bhagavad-gītā has been revealed many times, did it look different every time? Like, was it a different story?
It was different. It was slightly different each time. So we touched on this in chapter 4. Krishna actually says, Krishna talks about it different times. He spoke the Bhagavad-gītā, and because he says that in chapter 4, they would have been aware. They would have been aware that so we're hearing this text which has already been spoken before in a different way, right? This knowledge, right? So were they aware? Yeah, they were aware, because Krishna pretty much says that I'm speaking the Bhagavad-gītā, which I've spoken before. I'm speaking it once again, right? So in that sense,
because
yes.
I'm thinking it's similar to the Muslim kalam. The kalam is tawheed, but it manifests.
Oh no, it's not like the kalam. It's not like the kalam. I know what you're talking about. It's different to the kalam.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a different concept. Yeah. I can talk to you personally about why it's a different concept, because I think that's a bit out of everyone else's interest about the kalam. Okay. If there's nothing else, if there's nothing else, I think we'll conclude there. Again, sorry to end on maybe a difficult to digest note. Next week, hopefully we'll digest it more and we'll realize it's not as confronting as we feel in our gut reaction, right? So please stay along. That's all I'm saying. Please don't be scared away from studying Bhagavad-gītā because of that. Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhyeva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.
Hari Bol. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.